Okay, everyone, I guess we're going to get started. I'm Erica Butler. I'm a journalist living and working in Sackville, New Brunswick, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's session. So I'm delighted to be here learning along with you. Some housekeeping notes to begin with. For those of us joining on Zoom, closed captioning is available if you need that. There should be a button on your screen. Keep it in mind, it is auto-generated, not made by a human. So unfortunately, it's not incredibly accurate, but it's a help. Everyone in the audience has their mics and video off, you will have noticed. So don't worry, you don't need to make sure you're muted or anything. It's all taken care of. If you have questions as we go, please put them in the chat window and we will do our best to get to them in the Q&A session after all of our speakers have presented. There's also, I believe, on the Facebook Live, you can, in the comment section, post, we'll be grabbing the questions from both of those places. Yes, and of course, a note, we are also broadcasting on Facebook Live. So if you're on the Zoom, you're also broadcasting on Facebook. Now I'll turn the mic over briefly to Joanna Bull, Community Engagement Manager with the Ecology Action Center.
Awesome. Thanks, Erica. And welcome everybody on behalf of EAC. So this is part 3 in a series of webinars we've been doing on mobilizing for a just and sustainable future here in Nova Scotia. The reason that we're doing this series is that the province is in the process of developing our provincial climate plan and environmental regulations for the next 10 years in our province. And so this is a really important moment for us to be speaking up for the things, for the vision that we have for the direction we want our province to go in. What do we want it to look like? What do we need to see? And what are the possibilities? And so we want to be having these conversations. We've been having a series of wonderful conversations with many different folks to start sparking our imaginations of what are some of those possibilities and what are the needs. So our other panels have discussed community climate solutions and how to transform our energy system. We're going to be speaking in another panel coming up in early June on climate adaptation. So we'll drop the links to those in the chat. Please check out the recordings to those as well. But tonight, we're talking about protecting the ecosystems that sustain us. So recognizing that we depend on healthy ecosystems to live, and so do other creatures. And the other creatures also have a right to a sustainable future. So tonight, we're going to be hearing from our panelists about sustainable approaches to forestry, why we need protected areas, the importance of taking care of water, and community resistance to polluting industries like open net pen aquaculture. So lots to learn about tonight. But as we begin and we're talking about land and protecting land, it's important to remember and respect the peoples who've been in relationship with this land where we're calling in from here for the last 14,000 years and beyond. So this is Ulnu territory, Mi'kmaq, and has been since time immemorial, and has never been given away or ceded in any way. It was stolen, rather, through colonial violence, and that process has continued to this day. And as I was thinking about the land acknowledgement for this particular session tonight, I was thinking about how the motivation behind that colonial violence that dispossessed Mi'kmaq people from their land, and that continues to dispossess Mi'kmaq people from their land, is to exploit the natural resources for profit. Right? That's always been what it's about. It's about access to the natural resources of the land, to be able to exploit them. And it's the same reason that today we have to talk about protecting those ecosystems and those other species and the very natural systems that our lives depend on. So all of these things are very, very connected. So I want to have us just bring that into our hearts and remember that long history on this land that we want to work to protect as we speak tonight. So with that, I'd like to introduce our elder, Dorene Bernard, who is here with us tonight, and invite you, Dorene, to open up our session tonight with a prayer to help invoke the sacredness of that relationship with the land and all of our relations who live here. So thank you, Dorene Willalin, for being here with us.
Thank you, Koe. Nindalawasi Gesadam Dandali Olnaway. My spirit name is She Loves Her Indian Ways, from the Otter clan, Gilnet clan in Sibaganegati, in Mi'kmaq. I offer a prayer of thanksgiving for Mother Earth and the sacred water Gisul, grandmothers, grandfathers from the 4 directions, please hear our humble prayer. We give thanks for allowing us to be here today in this sacred circle, to speak for the water, for the land, for Mother Earth. We give thanks for the water, Mother Earth's gift of life. We give thanks for the animals, the 4-legged, the winged ones, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, the plants, the trees, the rocks, all that enable us to live today. We give thanks for our female energy, our hearts and our minds, our male energy that empowers the potential for healing. We give thanks for all the many gifts, the blessings of Mother Earth that enable us to live. We ask for that blessing for mankind to understand the connection of Mother Earth, the water, to all life that sustains us. We do this, Gisul, Creator, so that we will always know the sacredness of water, Mother Earth, and we'll share with our future generations, our children now, today, and our future generations. It is our responsibility as human beings to speak for the water, to stand up for Mother Earth and all our relations. Msit Nogama, thank you.
Thanks so much for that beautiful prayer, Dorene. In that spirit, with that spirit, we're going to move on to listening and learning from our speakers today. I'm going to give some brief introductions just to give you a sense of who they are, but so that we can maximize the time that they have to speak for today. Our first speaker today is Karen McKendry, Wilderness Outreach Coordinator with the Ecology Action Centre. After a childhood spent exploring the woods and waters of Ontario and Quebec, Karen earned a Bachelor of Science degree in ecology and a Master's in environmental studies. She made her way to Nova Scotia in 2005, where she has worked as a conservation planner and biologist. When not devoting herself to the EAC's good work, she can be found in her garden, paddling, cooking up a storm, or laughing with her 2 wild little boys. Karen, welcome. Hi, Karen. So to start off, I wanted to ask you, one way of conserving the ecosystems that sustain us is creating and managing protected areas like national parks and wilderness areas. What is working well about that approach and what is not working?
Well, I do like that framing that it is one approach. So there are a number of ways that we need to work on biodiversity conservation, and one that has proven effective, given the humans that we are, is protected areas. So when I'm talking about protected areas, there is a sort of official definition that's used in Canada and beyond about areas of land. So I'm going to speak to land tonight. That are a specific area that have things in place, ideally for all time, forever. And those are places where the rest of nature comes first, where we manage for other species' needs ahead of ours, and then people are absolutely welcome. So we know the #1 threat in the world to biodiversity is habitat loss, and these are places where habitat loss doesn't happen. So they have been shown to be effective. We have a global biodiversity crisis, but that biodiversity is declining less in protected areas. So it's not solving it, but it's definitely helping. And the other place where we're experiencing less biodiversity loss is on lands managed by Indigenous people. So there was a landmark report that came out 2 years ago now that's flown by a group called the IPBES. So most people hadn't heard of them, but they're like the IPCC. They're like the international body of all of these researchers from around the world who tell you, synthesize all this information you need to know about climate change and what to do about it. There's a group just like that for biodiversity loss. And they synthesized all sorts of information and found that there's more than 1 million species that could go extinct in our lifetime. We know the main drivers of biodiversity loss. The number one is habitat loss. We know some of the things that work, but we're really going to need to employ everything that we have in front of us to reverse that. So we're going to need transformative change at all levels of society to turn that around. And so one tool that has been working is protected areas of all different kinds. I would say we can't look at any one thing and just pour all ourselves into that. There are things that haven't been working about protected areas. Protected areas, including in Canada, have a history of dispossessing land from Indigenous people. Classically, when something was well known about Parks Canada, when the park system was set up across the country, was that it did expropriate land from people as well. So there is that history of a top-down approach and rules and borders being put in that did not work well for people or the species that we were trying to protect. And so new ways forward need to recognize that and are doing that. And also new ways forward are breaking open what's possible. So there are more protected areas categories and ways of managing that are coming online that are in cooperation with communities, or in some cases community-led or Indigenous-led. So some of the things that haven't been working well are starting to be addressed.
That's good to know. How much, when we're talking about the various categories of protected land, how much land is enough? Canada has just committed to protecting 25% by 2025 and 30% by 2030. How much do we need in Nova Scotia to survive and thrive?
That's a tricky question because humans love their numbers, right? Like we have this target and we have these percentages and we go after, but there's like some layers underneath that. So one, it's the only tool, it's not the only tool we should use. So we should also have goals on the working landscape, like places outside of protected areas. How do we know if they're getting better for biodiversity? What are our measures there, and what targets are we willing to commit to? It matters where protected areas are. So if you want to get your percentage up and you want to protect a whole bunch more land, you could protect a bunch of land that doesn't have a lot of other conflicts with it to get your numbers up, but that won't protect key biodiversity areas. So there are areas identified in Nova Scotia and Canada and beyond that disproportionately are really important for maintaining and restoring our biodiversity, but they might have a high conflict because people want other things from those areas as well. So it really doesn't matter where they are as well. So what range can we talk about? Well, there is an idea that is gaining more traction called nature needs half, which is an idea that's been around since the 1970s, but now has more backing, which is we perhaps need to be managing half of the land in the world where biodiversity comes first. That doesn't mean it's all as protected areas, but an amount of it would be, and people would still absolutely be welcome there. So that now has more scientific support. It has more support from Indigenous and local knowledge as well. And so there is a campaign that we should aim to protect half of the world by 2050. But what can we do here in Nova Scotia is a challenging question. So about 13.8% of Nova Scotia is protected as protected areas now. There's all different kinds of protected areas and new ones are coming online. Protected areas advancement has been slow in Nova Scotia, and there's a couple reasons for that. We do have some good processes here where local communities are consulted and Indigenous communities are consulted, and there's now more Indigenous-led conservation here. We have a lot of private land here that's currently privately owned, and it's harder to make big protected areas there quickly. So we have a slow and thoughtful process here, and we haven't had strong political interest in protected areas. So if we were to ramp that up in the next couple of years, try to have more of these protected areas for all of their benefits, like not only are they helping with biodiversity, these are nature-based climate solutions. They're areas that trap more carbon and allow us to have more adaptive maneuverability under climate change. So there's like more and more compelling reasons for protected areas. And they also have co-benefits, so things that they weren't originally managed for, but are turning out great. So classic co-benefits of protected areas are tourism and other economic development immediately around protected areas. But one benefit that I think a lot of people can identify with, especially now during the pandemic, is the health benefits of protected areas. The very tangible physical and mental health benefits that you get from going to a park or going to a wild place that you went to before and having all those memories come back up for you, or building new memories with multiple generations in your family or with friends. I mean, I know under the pandemic, lots of my weeks are a blur and I can identify with the word blur today. But what sticks out for me even more now is when I'm alone in nature or when I'm out with my family and we're having we go to these places that we can count on to build those like history of our family and those family memories. So I think there's more recognition that protected areas are more than just for the other species. They're for all of us and they have multiple benefits. And so if we could ramp them up in Nova Scotia in a good way, I think that's something really constructive we can do around biodiversity loss.
You piqued my curiosity here, Karen. Like, do we have the right categories and tools to create the? You mentioned that we obviously can't just make only national parks, and with that top-down approach that just sort of comes in and says this is how it's going to be. It has to come from communities. Indigenous communities have to lead us. Do we have the right tools for the types of protected areas we're seeing come up in Nova Scotia? Do you think that we're doing okay there?
That's one of the things I'm most excited about in my work now, and I got to find the exciting points because there's lots of reasons to be worried each day. But yeah, I think we are like cracking open really neat new ways to protect land in Nova Scotia. So one area that's been growing over the years is the contribution of land trusts. And, spoiler alert, I did used to work for a land trust. But they're nonprofit organizations that partner with private landowners, individuals that have something really special on their property, like endangered species habitat or something. And both organization and the person commit to keep it wild forever through an agreement. So that's a neat tool. There's more Indigenous-led conservation options that are coming online. I've heard a great webinar about one of the first IPCAs, Indigenous Protected and Conserved Areas, that's being worked on in Unama'ki and Cape Breton. And there's like these new funky tools. Like a strange thing in Canada is that a lot of the Department of National Defense sites across Canada, which tend to be really large and you can't get into for like safety reasons, and they have fences around them sometimes, they have a really high level of biodiversity and a number of endangered species simply because they didn't become anything else over the decades. So there are now ways that Department of National Defense sites can do their defense work in one corner, and the rest of it that's still wild counts as a protected area and can be managed in that way. So, I mean, part of that is probably the Government of Canada looking for percentages, but if they look in the right places that are high biodiversity and they work with community, then I think it could be a beneficial situation.
All right. What is the EAC hoping to see from the Nova Scotia government going forward with protected areas, do you think, in terms of targets or policy?
Well, I'm on board with Harvey Locke and the idea that nature needs to have personally, and what a wonderful world that would be. But it's going to take a bit to get there, right? We've protected a number of places in Nova Scotia that are amazing, but it's getting harder and harder as we're coming up against more and more conflicts about a special wild place and other things we want to do with that place, like mining or forestry or whatever. So it's getting harder and harder, so it could slow down. I think if we could all commit to 17% protected areas by the year 2020 and have that broader range of ways to do that, and have a good process for identifying the most important areas, not the easiest, and community engagement, I think we could ramp things up and get to 17%. And that would be really helpful in Canada, given Nova Scotia is really small and we have these other constraints. And it's going to have all those kinds of co-benefits that we say we want now, like green jobs and helping to deal with climate change and having those accessible nature for how much we realize that's really important, low cost piece of health infrastructure. So I'll be advocating for 17% as we go into the public consultations for the SDGA.
All right. Thanks so much, Karen. Just a heads up, everyone listening, that EAC staff are posting some links in the chat as you go. So just if things get mentioned, there's further reading to be had. Yeah, thanks so much. And please post your questions in the chat or the comments, and we'll get to them at the end. So Karen's going to stick around to be able to answer some questions after. Next up, we're going to hear from Dorene Bernard. You've already heard Dorene give today's prayer, so perhaps she doesn't need an introduction, but I will do my best anyhow. Dorene is a Mi'kmaq grassroots grandmother, water protector, water walker, and survivor of the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. She studied at Dalhousie and Laurier universities, has an over 20-year career in social work, and has been recognized for her work in Indigenous issues, environmental justice, climate justice, and truth and reconciliation. Dorene coordinates the Grassroots Grandmother Circle in social justice work, child welfare issues, missing and murdered Indigenous women, cultural education, and water teachings. I will let our listeners know that Dorene will have to leave before the end of today's session. So if anyone has a specific question for Dorene, don't hesitate to put it in the chat or comment window, and we will try to get those before Dorene leaves. So to start things off, Dorene, first of all, welcome again. Thank you for welcoming us here today. Can you speak about our responsibility to protect water? Oh, just a second, Dorene. We just need to get you unmuted. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes, thank you for this opportunity to speak today for the water and about our responsibility to protect the water. When we speak about the water, we share the knowledge of the elders who shared the teachings of the water and the women with us. In the healing journey I've been on, I learned a lot about the ceremonies that taught me to respect Mother Earth and the water, to honor the water with gratitude, for giving us life. We are taught to connect the water that is inside of us to the water and tell the water, I love you, I thank you, I respect you. We are humbled to know the water. Our teachings are that women are the protectors of the water. We have been gifted with the ability to bring new life forward. Carried in the womb, our first world is the water. We breathe the water, we drink the water, we are the water. We are born through the water, and we carry the spirit of the water into this world with us. Water is sacred. With this gift, women are given a responsibility to protect the water for the children and for all future generations. We are the voice for the children, the animals, the flyers, the swimmers, the crawlers, all life. We call our Nogama, all our relations. We must never take water for granted. There are millions of people, animals, environments on Mother Earth today that do not have access to clean water. Water is a finite source, the source of life, not a resource. There's a water ceremony that you can do every night before you go to sleep. Put your cup of water beside you with your good intention to communicate with the water. Water hears us, sees us, feels us. It knows us, our thoughts and our dreams. In the morning when you wake up, take your water, hold your water and tell the water, I love you, I thank you, I respect you. Ask the water to be your first medicine, to go to your mind, your body, your spirit, your emotions, where you need that healing and help. Ask for good help, good health. and understanding. Offer a sip of water to the earth and a pinch of tobacco or cornmeal to tell Mother Earth that you are giving thanks for this sacred water. And drink that water for your first medicine. Simple ceremony that everyone can do to develop a relationship with the water. Connect the water that's inside of you to the water that you drink every day. When you see or know the water that is polluted or sick, offer tobacco and pray for the water. Your petitions to help the water to heal. You can help the water to heal. We are taught that water, we are part water. We are taught these ceremonies. We learn these things. And we share, this is why we share these teachings, because they're universal teachings for everyone. The ancestral memory of colonial trauma, residential school, oppression is carried within us, along with the resilience, the resistance of my ancestors, that we continue to stand up for our Mother Earth and the water, for our families and communities and our nations. And this has to be passed down through the generations. That is why we are still here. As a grandmother, I have been called to offer prayer and ceremony and to stand on the front line to protect the water, our Mother Earth, and stand up for my grandchildren and for our treaty rights and inherent rights as Indigenous people in Mi'kmaq. Mi'kmaq grassroots have been standing up for the water and environment throughout generations, protecting our treaty rights to our lands, waters, and resources. We have seen the destruction of environmental racism in Mi'kmaq and the resistance of the people against corporations that have come here to create industry and extract oil and gas and lumber and for their profit, and leave the lands and the waters and the air polluted and destroyed. The burden of the cleanup of the poisons and decades of destruction are left for the people of Nova Scotia. Indigenous people and allies have been successful to stop corporations in New Brunswick, at Elsipogtog, in Nova Scotia at Lake Ainsley, in Unamaki, and the cleanup of Boat Harbor and Pictou Landing. Together, we can stop Alton gas storage and Goldboro, LNG, and the man camps that are coming to Mi'kmaq. We have been resisting Alton gas for over 6 years, and we will not allow them to destroy our river. We need the government to respect our Mi'kmaq treaties and implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as it was intended when it was written over 20 years ago. When the true intentions of protecting our Mother Earth and water and our inherent rights as Indigenous peoples all over the world, the Nova Scotia government must honor our treaty rights, the true meaning of Nedudalimk, and uphold the integrity of the ecosystem, the lands and the waters, the air, and all our resources that we in all our relations, our Nogama, depend on to survive now and for the next 7 generations. The Sustainable Development Goals Act includes the word Nedudalimk as one of the principles. But I am concerned that the inclusion of one Mi'kmaq word and not understanding the meaning will be enough to develop a sustainable development in Nova Scotia all across Mi'kmaq. It's very important, I think, that we look at who is going to benefit from these corporations coming into our pristine Canada's ocean playground, they call it, our pristine lands in Mi'kma'ki and the water that we so take for granted. Unless you have relationship with water, that you actually walk along those waterways and feel the spirits of the water to understand, what that means. And I think it's really important we continue to do the ceremonies for the water. We'll be walking for the water. It may not be in May this year because of COVID, but soon as we are able to, we will be walking again to pray for the water all over Mi'kma'ki and around the world where people are suffering. The water is suffering. And I just want to give thanks to my teachers, the people, the grandmothers who taught us how to pick up our responsibility and to share the teachings with all people. And I give thanks for allowing me to be here today to speak for the water. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Dorene. I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about, how people can support the fight against the Alton Gas Project and support your work in protecting the water.
Well, right now we still have 3 grandmothers that are in the court system against the Alton Gas injunction, and they'll be going. I guess court will be in June. We have that legal fight, and we are asserting our treaty rights. Our rights to protect our lands and our waters and our ability to practice our culture and traditions and fishing and gathering and hunting and being our food security, and our rights to our unceded Mi'kmaq territory. And this is part of what our fight is to stop this company from coming in to do whatever they want without any consultation, and the government also for granting permits without consultation as well, and the impacts of to our treaty rights. Supporting the legal fund for the Treaty Truck House legal fund for the continued, legal cost of this action, and I believe for any further actions that might be necessary because of this corporation's wanting to destroy our water, and to the way things are being done and permitted in our territory. I know there'll be more resistance than whenever any action is taken on their part. We've also looking at, we just finished, honoring the missing and murdered Indigenous women across Canada and bringing awareness about the so many stolen sisters across Canada. But here in Mi'kma'ki, when they announced the man camp, the 5,000 man camp that's to be built in Goldboro, LNG, many of our women have recently, come forward to say that we haven't been consulted about this, and we believe that our voices need to be heard about our concerns for our people. And so I think any support that we get from the general public, about the LNG, which is, I call it the head of the snake, because we are trying to stop the belly of the snake from storing the gas coming up from frack fields in Philadelphia up the Maritime Link to Nova Scotia pipeline. And we're trying to stop, them from building the storage. And they are, in Canso wanting to build the export terminal. So we have a lot of work to do together, to raise awareness about what's going on in Mi'kma'ki, and how people can be involved in protection of the water and protection of the land. Yes.
Thanks so much, Dorene.
The legal fund is this is Treaty Truck House Legal Fund at gmail.com. I think it is. I have to get it .com or you can check that. I'll check it.
All right, I guess we will try and see if we can make sure we get that that link for people up. And Joanna Bull, there she is in the chat. She has posted the GoFundMe for the Treaty Truck House Legal Fund.
Thank you.
Legal expenses are no walk in the park.
Yeah.
Dorene, I'll just ask you one more thing. Your actions and your words about water show this deep respect that you have, this very, very, this value that is part of your whole being. And when you look at something like the Sustainable Development Goals Act, as you mentioned, there's, like a single word. Does our act show enough of that, the value that you think that we need to wake up and have when it comes to valuable things like water?
Well, I would say that for that word to be used, I remember I was really questioning at that time. We were across the street in court for the women that are going to stop, that were trying to stop Alton Gas. And then they were at the legislature, talking about the Sustainable Development Act. And we could see, the way that the environmental assessments that are being done or not done, and the way that the permits are given without the consultation of Indigenous people. It was almost, to me, it was just a word that to me, it was just a word, a very important word to us, that they were throwing around and placing it in the middle of an act that we didn't see how it was going to be implemented, because I don't believe that they understand the meaning. Just much like you said, that protecting the water, being the water is so much a part of us, and until you realize that or embrace that, you will just take your drink of water for granted. Where many people, Indigenous people, can't even turn a tap on, and haven't been able to do that for over 20 years, turn a tap on and get clean water to drink. Just here in Canada, when you imagine where there's many places around the world where people don't even have clean drinking water. And then just to put it in perspective, the integrity of the environment, that we don't change we don't harm the environment. That's more than what we need to take for sustainability to live. And I think we have done more than that. Mankind has done more than that. Of course, we're in this crisis of climate change. they've done so much that we've done so much that it's changed ecosystems around the world. It's changed, like you said, when we talk about endangered species, or they're totally eradicated in places around the world. And we have to look at how we are going to take responsibility, each and every one of us. When we talk about these things and then we say to ourselves, what are we going to do about it?
Mhm.
And I think that's the challenge for each and every one of us.
Right, the challenge, how to get those values in there and have them enacted in actions instead of just lip service.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dorene. I really appreciate
Right.
that. That was wonderful. Yeah, and we're going to move on now. And please post your questions. As I've said a few times now, post your questions. We're going to move on to Geoff LeBoutillier. Geoff is a former motion picture writer and producer who now spends his time on his passion for the environment and his community. He is founder of the St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship Association and has been a contributing force in a number of other coalitions, initiatives, and organizations, all with a green bent. He is part of the Healthy Bays Network, made up of various groups with a shared vision for sustainable coastal economies and healthy bays free of open net pen aquaculture in Nova Scotia. Welcome, Geoff. And Geoff, you're muted, so we'll just get you to unmute there. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. So,
thanks to Dorene for such a moving and on point words. It was great. It's like nowhere I think is water suffering more than in the open net pen industry in Nova Scotia, which is growing, and much to our chagrin. And so it's hard to imagine that, you know, there are strict rules about agriculture or cities dumping their sewage into the coastal waters of Nova Scotia, and yet the open net pen industry is able to do that with impunity. Isn't that shocking? I'm assuming that everybody online here this evening knows what open net pens are. They're big cages that are anchored in our coastal waters, filled with millions of largely Atlantic salmon. And because the salmon are so crowded and living in close quarters, and they have to be kept alive through pumps, giving them air when the water's the wrong temperature, and providing them with chemicals and food and so forth and so on. So with the fish poop, the chemicals, the antibiotics, and the fish, all that drifts down out of the net pens and floats around in the water with the tides and currents, and is scattered hither and yon. And it's a very inefficient, dangerous, damaging way to grow protein. So I could go on, but I don't think I will. What I thought might be useful, and it's hard. Nova Scotia has the potential to be the greenest place on earth. We have a small population, small area. We have a history of cultural sensitivity to community and family. I spent 20 years in Alberta. In Alberta, it's rugged individualism, and that's where you see people sort of, no mask demonstrations and that kind of stuff going on there. But here we have a different sensibility. We have the ability to change things. So I thought what might be instructive, useful for people, is just to look at this little battle. There are big battles Alton gas, gold and forestry issues. But there is this issue that has, for some reason, attracted my attention because I guess I'm so involved with St. Margaret's Bay and have been for a few hundred years in my family. So it's very precious to me. And so I just thought I would quickly run through the history of my involvement in that. I am a political animal. And Dorene, it takes, I think, a much more grounded approach to dealing with an issue. But for me, it's the nuts and bolts of politics and what kind of pressures can be exerted in order to make changes in policy and law. And so while I think fundamentally we're all driven by the same sort of deeply rooted metaphysical philosophy that drives Dorene, my way of approaching it is political. So in 2008, 2009, they were putting I can see it from my window, across the bay in Northwest Cove, a proposal for open net pens, and we opposed it. Many of the communities in Nova Scotia that were opposed to open net pens organized and started to, the Ecology Action Center was very important in bringing that action together. There was a giant rally, thousands of people. What I did, what I participated in that sort of community-based activity, but I also embedded myself within the NDP and fought for environmental causes on a political level within the party. And fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, the NDP formed the government, and I was the chair of the Environment Committee, and we put together what I arguably the strongest piece of environmental policy of any party in Canada. It was a terrific document. But one thing that was not allowed was a strong position against open net pens. So we attempted to have that adopted, and we failed. And in fact, the NDP Minister of Aquaculture ended up giving $25 million to cook aquaculture, and it was we were all shocked and dismayed. However, we continued to exert pressure from within and without, and in the end, in the waning days of the Dexter regime, in fact, the government reversed its policy, and a moratorium was struck, and a blue ribbon commission was struck, led by Minor Dole and Bill Leahy, now additionally famous Bill for his forest policy document. So the Dole-Leahy Commission made recommendations. Dexter was given the boot. McNeil came in, and part of the McNeil government job was to implement Dole-Leahy, which was going to fix open net pens. Well, the centerpiece of the new legislation was the Aquaculture Review Board, which was put into law in 2015, 2016. And it has yet, this is 2021, that was 2016. It has yet to meet, to decide on a single open net pen lease or license in this province. 6 years, 5 years, months are spinning by, and it has yet to meet. So
that's like 2 or 3 pandemics ago.
Well, there has been a little hiatus with the pandemic. So just before sort of the lockdown a year ago, this past March, when there was a movement by the provincial government to encourage a huge multinational Cermaq to come into the province to put open net pens, and it expands, like you double the capacity of the Nova Scotia open net pen business. And the communities, the 4 little communities, St. Mary's Bay, Eastern Shore, Liverpool, and St. Margaret's and Mahone Bays, these 4 individual groups raised a stink. We had meetings, we had press, we did everything, we pulled out all the stops. And in fact, as you know, just as the lockdown was happening, Cermaq said, we told you we didn't want to come here if we weren't wanted. We're not wanted. Besides, Nova Scotia isn't a good place to do open net pens. We're going away. So great, we won. Cermaq went away, but the void created by Cermaq's departure is rapidly being filled by Cook Aquaculture and in agreement with the provincial government to expand. So in 2016, the legislation for the Aquaculture Review Board and the other changes resulting from the Dole-Leahy Commission were still being realized. The aquaculture industry went to the government and said, how can we work under these conditions? There's, we don't know what's going to happen. What are the laws going to be? And the government said, you guys go ahead and make the expansion that you want to make. And when we get the Aquaculture Review Board set up, you can then, fill out an application. Those applications will be reviewed by the Aquaculture Review Board, and it'll give a thumbs up or a thumbs down. That's what will happen. Well, so here we are, as I say, 2021, and it still hasn't happened. So the battle continues. So to bring all this to a conclusion, the 4 communities have joined forces with the Ecology Action Center. Thank you very much. The Atlantic Salmon Federation, individual community organizations like the St. Margaret's Bay Stewardship Association, the Friends of Nature, and many others, and formed a coalition called the Healthy Bays Network, which mirrors, in a way, the Healthy Forest Coalition. And I wondered if there maybe is an expanding brand of healthy Nova Scotia and environmental organizations. And because there is so much common ground between healthy waters, healthy mines, healthy bays, and healthy forests. So in my opinion, the answer lies, am I over my time? I'm not even looking at the clock. Please cut me off, Joanna or Erica, if I'm talking too long.
No, go ahead.
The solution is in building strong coalitions. The Healthy Bays Network is incorporated. We have been working. We meet every 2 weeks since a year ago last March. We have a fabulous group of people who are involved in this, experienced PhDs and scientists and lawyers and all kinds of stuff. We have sophisticated communication strategies. What else is in my list? Recruiting members, all those things that one does in kind of textbook coordination and organization. It's done the same in many fronts. And so here we are. We've formed regional coalition groups in Newfoundland, Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick are joining forces with us. And we've also formed alliances with groups on the West Coast as well. And very soon, within the next year, we will undoubtedly have both a federal and a provincial election. And you can be certain that we'll be playing a very active role in trying to influence the outcome of those elections. So it's kind of nuts and boltsy, but that's what we're doing, and that's what I've been doing since I was in my 20s, and I'm now in my 70s. And I guess we're making little tiny advances, but man, it's a long, hard battle. It's a slog.
Thanks for that, Geoff. I have a quick question. We do need to get to our next speaker, but I do want to ask what is it that, the communities in the Healthy Bays Network in general is asking for from the government in terms of what would you like to see? Can you give us the nutshell in, sort of your key asks in terms of?
Yeah, so it's very simple. It's no more net, get them out of the water. No more net pens. Get them out of the water, and there are alternatives. So we try to. That's what we want. We want them out of the water, and land-based closed containment is a attractive option if it's done correctly, and so that is what we're looking at trying to have happen. So to achieve that, but get them out of the water. Does that answer your question? That's
Yeah, I think
pretty
so.
simple.
Yeah. So you're saying, yeah, open net pen, no way. Yeah.
No way. I mean, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans, as you know, is not renewing theoretically, although it's being seriously challenged by the industry. 18 out of 19 net pen licenses in the Discovery Islands in BC, which is a move in the right direction. But we call it the goose-gander argument. So if it's good for that goose, why isn't it good for us, the ganders? Like, why can you have them removed on the West Coast and not here? It doesn't make any sense. There should be one policy for all of Canada, and the government is now drafting a new Aquaculture Act, and we're working with the Ecology Action Centre and others to try and make sure that that Aquaculture Act eliminates open net pens, creates a uniform policy towards aquaculture, net growing fin fish in Canada in a sustainable way. It's got to happen.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Geoff. We appreciate it. Everyone, post your questions. You know the drill. Thanks very much for that, Geoff LeBoutillier. Our final speaker today is Mary Jane Rodger, Executive Director of the Medway Community Forest Cooperative. Originally hailing from Ontario, Mary Jane holds a master's in forest conservation and is a registered professional forester in Nova Scotia and a member of the Minister of Lands and Forestry's Ecological Forestry Advisory Committee. Welcome, Mary Jane.
Thanks for having me.
So, Mary Jane, the kind of mass clear cutting we see from most of our forest industry has a deeply destructive impact on our forests. Can you tell us about the work of the Medway Community Forest Cooperative and the ways you do forestry differently?
Sure, I'll start off by just explaining the organization. So the Medway Community Forest is a member-based cooperative. We manage a 15,000 hectare Crown land license in Annapolis County. The organization itself was formed in 2014 through a group of concerned community members, primarily to submit a proposal following the purchase of the former Bowater lands in Southwest Nova Scotia by the province. So following kind of a long process, the Medway Community Forest was successful in securing a pilot project agreement, which was originally for a 3-year term, which we're now still operating under, about six plus years into the project, but we're actually looking forward to negotiating a longer term agreement sometime soon. So community forestry in itself is quite a bit different than how typical industrial crown land forestry operates in Canada. So most community forests operate on principles of high environmental stewardship. They look at diversifying revenue streams and seeing economic benefits go to local communities rather than to industrial lumber mills. We also have a governance structure in place that focuses on community decision-making. So really giving local communities the authority to make decisions that implicate the resources in their own backyard. And then there's typically a structure in place that provides some more direct economic benefit to these local communities, typically through a structure for community investment funding, or being held in a trust. So as an organization, our mission is to support our local community through ecologically based forest management. A key component to achieving this mission is really through maximizing the multiple values that exist on our land base and within the local community. We really like to look at the community forest as a way to improve economic resiliency within the community of Caledonia. So Caledonia in itself was drastically implicated from that Bowater closure. And we're really looking to build resiliency, build diverse economic revenue streams, and help the community reinvent itself in terms of how its relationship is with forestry operations. So in terms of our management practices itself, we've really been a leader in practicing ecological forestry on Crown land. This has primarily been due to that member-based structure I talked about earlier. So we have a very diverse membership. Anyone can become a member. It's a one-time $25 fee. And then our members then have some say in the decision-making practices that go on within the organization. So early on in the pilot project agreement, we set out to develop a new management plan for the Medway Community Forest. And we really wanted this process to be as engaging and inclusive as possible, in order to get really capture the diversity of values within our community. So through this process, we've developed kind of a structure that goes above and beyond what is traditionally expected of Crown land licensees. So in that, we've developed some very specific special management practices that ensure that forestry operations on our Crown land license area are in line with what is most ecologically appropriate, or what is aligned with what would naturally occur. So the natural disturbance regimes in our area. So just to give you some examples of those special management practices, we're the only Crown licensee, and probably one of the only Crown licensees in the entire country that has a silent season for migratory birds. So that's a 4-week period, typically in the month of June, where we cease all harvesting operations, as well as any sort of other operations that might cut down trees, so new road building or anything like that, in order to allow for a silent season, or a singing season for those migratory birds that really need that quiet and are nesting in the community forest license area. And of course, that's our obligation in order to be within the means of the Migratory Birds Convention Act, and not willfully destroying the nests of any bird species. We have additional special management practices that aren't captured through the province's special management practices. So that might include no road building or upgrading during turtle nesting season. We also have increased watercourse buffers and special management zones surrounding parks and protected areas. And what we really want to make sure in all of our forestry practices is that we're not setting back the clock. We don't want to be doing intensive practices that are going to, and when I say setting back the clock, I really mean referring to what us foresters call successional pathways within forest growth. So we're not looking to grow species that are younger, more suited to open conditions. We're looking to grow more mature, more diverse forests. So really our most intensive practices are small patches cut within stands. That's kind of our closest thing to a clear cut we currently operate under, but really we're just looking to restore and manage the license area in a way that's would be perceived as natural for the Acadian forest. So our decision to do things differently is really made from that membership base, and it's not just to look at cutting wood for the sake of it, but really operating on a precautionary, proactive level and having management that's founded in science. But that said, our model's not perfect. We definitely, to this date, haven't really reached the benchmark where we're paying for our overhead and admin expenses. So we still receive ongoing government funding. We're hoping to be someday at a structure where we can negotiate a way that we could be economically viable without that ongoing funding. And that'll probably be looking at some sort of innovation in forest products development or manufacturing. I'll mention as well that we are building, land trusts were mentioned earlier. We are building Nova Scotia's first land trust that's really targeting working woodlands, working private woodlands. So this concept really came up from a real distinct woodlot owner community that we have within the Caledonia area, and seeing a need to prevent liquidation logging and clear cutting on a property level basis. So what we're trying to do with the development of this land trust, which we're calling the Nova Scotia Working Woodlands Trust, is to provide a legal document or a legally binding easement on a property so that only sustainable forest management practices can occur on that property. And that, of course, would stay with the property in perpetuity. So we really see this as a huge opportunity for woodlot owners, not in just protecting their stewardship legacies, but also looking at different avenues for revenue, such as carbon credits, and of course, promoting a new leg to landscape level management, and really the working forest, or the well-stewarded working forest, often isn't captured in landscape level planning or conservation approaches, and we do think it has an essential role to play in protecting wildlife habitat, particularly on that landscape scale. So I'll leave that there for now.
It's super interesting, Mary Jane. I guess this ties back into, this is sort of a new kind of protection. Working Woodlands Trust that Karen was talking about earlier. If we're developing these different tools where we can, protect large swaths of land, and if, you have woodlots that have been sustainably harvested for a generation, then how can you ensure that the next generation does the same thing? Mm-hmm. And so you're saying create the legal framework to make it possible, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it also helps fill the gap, because a lot of woodlot owners that want to see their lands protected or conserved through an existing land trust like the Nature Conservancy or the Nova Scotia Nature Trust, a lot of them don't qualify because they don't have that necessarily like special attribute or, species at risk on their woodlands, but, a lot of them are really ecologically valuable. So it's a way to capture kind of additional lands and in seeing the ecological value of kind of a working landscape as well.
All right. Wow, thanks so much for that. I guess, it's looking like we got to get to some questions here. It's 10 after 7, 12 after 7. So I am going to head on over to my little question document here. I am going to throw this one out. And this is from Paul Strom. Early on in the webinar, he asked, all this knowledge and discussion amongst us will be for naught if our politicians are not willing to act like it's an emergency. For instance, Canada is so far behind other countries on GHG emissions. So how are we going to get politicians to listen and act accordingly? Maybe I'll go first to Geoff LeBoutillier, because you did fully admit to being a political animal, Geoff. So I'm afraid you get this question first. What are your best practices for actually getting politicians to be able to act on some of these principles and values that we're talking about?
It's as I said, it's a long and incremental battle, and so definitely the ballot box and everything leading up to it. So I think they're one of the most effective exercises that I participated in my checkered political environmental history, was working with the lovely and talented Jen Powley and others to set up our HRM Alliance, which ended up being an alliance of 60 groups, environmental groups around HRM. And meanwhile, there was a committee comprised of citizens and councillors, and we got one of our number, me actually, to work on that committee. So we were both outside lobbying for a change in the municipal planning strategy, and we had a mole on the inside, receiving the lobby effort. So was it Machiavellian? I don't know. And did it actually work? I don't know. But we did get out of that what was called the Green Network Plan, and now and now there's a lot of talk in HRM about connectivity, and it has definitely influenced how things go. So to answer Paul's question, I think it's a process of devising a strategy for each event. I mean, the Healthy Forest Coalition, which is it was working on that, but I first met you, Paul, and looking at carbon offsets in forestry at that workshop in Cape Breton and Port Hawkesbury. That is that was or continues to be an ongoing process. I mean, talk to Dale Prest, and he'll tell you how long it is and how discouraging, but there are sort of incremental improvements, convincing arguments.
All right.
Is that helpfol? Maybe.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, thanks very much. Does anyone else, any of the other panelists feel like chiming in on dealing with politicians swaying the decision makers? Karen or Mary Jane? Is Dorene still with us? I think she must be gone by now.
I can maybe speak to that a bit. I mean, we've gone through obviously a pretty substantial transition in the forestry industry with a whole forest practices review. But I mean, when government does provide that sort of forum, it really does give you the opportunity to get your voice heard. And I found what's been really effective for us is doing it in practice. So we weren't always allowed to even do partial harvests where the province was prescribing clear cuts, but we've just kind of been so persistent in terms of our practice and also in terms of course, our membership and having a voice behind us. That's really been effective in politicians seeing the opportunity that good forest management presents.
Okay, thanks for that.
I might actually chime in on that one too. This is Joanna here. I know I'm not officially a panelist, but since we've been talking about the SDGA, just a quick story that the reason that the current act came into place, or what it came into place sort of in response to, was the really massive climate strike that the students organized in 2019, where we had almost 10,000 people in the streets of Halifax. And the next week they said, oh gosh, we'd better set a climate target. And so they pushed through this piece of legislation. And now it's still missing a lot of things. And there's going to be public consultations coming up very soon that we want everyone to weigh in on, to be able to flesh that out better. But it was a really interesting example of when people were able to demonstrate enough power for the government to say, oh, this is something we actually have to respond to. So I think that, I think about how do we build and demonstrate power it's a very good question.
I've got a couple questions here for Mary Jane. Mary Jane, Brian Gifford wants to know, is an increased size forest acreage one element in becoming economically viable? Will you need to get bigger in order to become viable, I guess?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge component. So a part of our license area being formally owned by Bowater means it's been intensively managed for decades. So a lot of it is quite young. So of our entire license area, we're only looking at about 30% of it being in an operable condition, 30 to 40%. So we're hoping to expand roughly about 10,000 hectares. So expand to about 25,000 hectares, and hopefully that will help. But along with that, we paid the same stumpage rates as industrial licensees do, which is not the case for community forests elsewhere in the country, particularly in BC. A lot of that's due to the Nova Scotia softwood lumber exemption, but there are different ways of looking at things, such as a revenue sharing agreement or something along those lines that would provide the community forest mechanism to both pay our staff as well as have a structure for community investment. So it's a little complex, but a larger license area would definitely help.
All right. Geoff, there's a bit of a technical one for you here. Carolyn Wood would like to know, are land-based fish farms really better? And how do they work? And what species can be grown? And are they just inhumane factory farming for fish?
Well, yeah, I'm not an expert at that, but I'm a great admirer of the work that's been undertaken by Sustainable Blue, that I hold up as kind of a paragon for zero emissions, land-based closed containment. And they've grown a number of species, sea bass and trout, but they're now concentrated quite completely, I believe, on salmon. And the potential is huge. What in land-based, and it's like totally pure. The water, they create their own salt water, and they purify it. It goes through the tanks every 20 minutes for the entire life of the fish, and it ends up being delicious food. I mean, the biggest challenge, I think, in that is in the fish feed itself and finding sustainable ways to create that. What they're looking at is, it's all over the press, so you probably know this, but looking at new ways of creating, use algae to create omega-3 fatty, and also doing soldier flies to create protein, partnerships with fish in the field. So they grow rice, they harvest the rice, then they put fish in the paddies. They love the stubble, they grow, and then that those fish in the rice paddies is used to add protein to the fish feed. So ways to keep from doing what's happening in the Gambia, as reported in Ian Urbina's recent book. So it's a long and complicated process, but Nova Scotia has Sustainable Blue, which is an amazing operation, which is leading the world in sophisticated technology. So why is the government providing so many incentives for open net pens? Beats me. Why aren't we putting our energy into creating a really smart, sustainable, following the leadership of countries all over the world that are moving to land-based closed containment?
Thanks for that, Geoff. I've had the pleasure of visiting that Sustainable Blue facility, and it's quite remarkable. Yeah, even the waste containment, like it's yeah, it's quite something.
I was wondering, I had one more thing, Eric, if I just give me 1 minute out of it, because it's really interesting. They're going through a process of rapid growth and looking for investment. Once they reach a certain scale, then they'll be able to compete effectively with the open net pens. So the question is, what it intrigues me is if there were ability, if communities could create collectives so that it's community owned, just like the community, the Medway Community Forest. I mean, that if that model could be translated into land-based closed containment operations throughout Nova Scotia and provide a community-managed, community-owned source of employment with long-range goals in mind, how smart that would be to replicate what Mary Jane and her colleagues are doing down in Caledonia, and to do that in fish farming. Or, you know, there's many ways that we could use that model. It's a smart model.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting now that there's a lot of potential crossover between the subject area and all three of our speakers right now, just because, you know, like the model that's happening in Port Medway, the collective management and that decision making happening from community members, that, you know, you buy a membership, you have like a voice in the decision making, which is quite interesting. There's a question here, Karen McKendry. I might get you to take this one on. It's from Carolyn Clack-Doyle. She's asking about coastal buffer zones, asking about the right to roam with a low impact footprint along private property, similar to the right of fishers now. Can we encode a right to roam? Is that a type of protected land that we could look at? Does this ring any bells for you, Karen?
It does ring bells, though I'm going to say it's out of my depth. But I do know like a little bit about, you know, in other countries, including famously in the UK, there's a right to roam where people can move across private land. In fact, landowners maintain their land to facilitate traditionally used trails and work on gates and stuff. So if people have traveled in the UK, they would be familiar with the right to roam. And then the difference here that we have through colonialism embedded this conception that, you know, you have these property boundaries, you have certain entitlements, and part of your entitlements is the ability to keep people off your land a lot of the time. So there is interest in changing that. There isn't a movement around that in Nova Scotia, but I think looking at that would help decolonize how we've set things up here. One aspect that people have used here that interestingly is embedded in our past is that you can move across the landscape in order to fish. So if you need to move across someone's private land to fish, you wouldn't be violating a trespass law, especially if you're bringing fishing equipment with you. So some people will carry a fishing pole to cross land for other purposes, but then they feel like if confronted, they could say that they were heading somewhere to fish. So there are people who want to take that apart. I've never heard of that portrayed as a type of protected area. But if people want to come together and examine that, I think it would have other benefits as well.
All right. Yeah. So interesting. All right. Yeah. I think that we need to wrap it up now. I'm going to pass it over. Thank you so much to the panelists today. I certainly learned a lot, and I really appreciate your time and your skills and your expertise. I'm going to pass it over to Joanna Bull to talk a bit and wrap things up and talk a bit about why we're all here anyway today. Joanna.
Yeah. Thanks, Erica, and thanks everybody. This has been super, super interesting. I've really enjoyed listening to each of you and to Dorene as well, even though she had to leave a little early. So I just want to put in another plug. You've heard the SDGA, or the Sustainable Development Goals Act, mentioned a few times. This is this piece of legislation that's setting out our climate plan and our environmental goals for the next 10 years here in Nova Scotia. So it's a really important piece of policy that's coming through from our government. And there's going to be public consultation starting very, very soon. So I wrote down some of the really good ideas that came out of folks tonight, that I'm hoping that these are the kinds of ideas that when all of you go out and storm those consultations to really set out your vision for what you want this province to look like in 10 years. What's the direction we want to go in? Maybe it includes things like protecting 17% of our land and doing that in a way that actually is engaging communities and making sure that communities can benefit following the leadership of Indigenous communities in protecting land. Maybe it also includes respecting treaty rights and implementing the UN Declaration for the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, protecting water from polluting industries like Alton Gas or Goldboro LNG or the fracking projects, and really thinking about how we can in our own lives too respect and love water as part of us. With a little plug here, this is not something to ask the government to do, but if all of us can go and support that legal fund for the grandmothers who've been on the front lines, that is a very small way for us to contribute to their very, very deep and long fight as well. And hopefully that this act can be something that helps move our society in the direction of not taking more from the environment than we need to survive. I think that was how Dorene had shared the real meaning of Nadugalimk. And if we did that, what would that look like? What would our world look like? Some of it is stopping other destructive industries like these open net pens that just don't need to be polluting our bays anymore, and supporting the kinds of forestry that Mary Jane was talking about that are driven by environmental stewardship, that benefit local communities and help to build resilient and diverse economies in our local areas that don't have to rely on destroying ecosystems, that we can thrive in harmony with the environments that we rely on. So hopefully some of this gave you some inspiration tonight. Keep your eyes peeled. We will definitely be letting you know as soon as we hear about consultations, and also for a future webinar, we have one more session, which is about how we collectively adapt to the impacts of the climate crisis, and what kinds of infrastructures of care and things do we need to have set up in order for us to do well together moving into the future as climate change intensifies. So definitely tune in for that. And if you missed the previous two webinars, you can find them on our website as well at the same link where you registered for this one. So I think I'll leave it there, but thank you so much. Thanks again to Erica, our wonderful moderator, and to all of you who asked questions, and to all of the speakers as well for this really wonderful discussion. To be continued. We'll be in touch. Thanks, everybody.